welcome to Playwright, a podcast about creating and sharing new ways to play. My name is Ryan Hamann. You can call me H.
And I'm Ryan Quintal. You can call me Q.
Now, I think we've both been getting into some, not necessarily brand new Ubisoft games lately. You talked a little bit about some of the racing games you picked up recently.
Yeah, that's right. And I took your recommendation and fired up The Crew, which is actually, between last episode and this, it's one of the most continuity we've ever had conversation on the show. But yeah, it starts out in Detroit, huh?
Yeah, so now you've been to, I mean, you more than been to, you used to live in Detroit.
I used to live in Detroit.
Yeah, what is that like? I mean, I've driven around Seattle and other places that I've been to, but I'm curious about your first impressions.
Well, it's certainly cleaner, / more, it has that sort of video game sterility that video game cities often do. Mm-hmm. You're not driving through a lot of, the realness of a road, the bumps, the potholes, mm-hmm. the stuff that wouldn't make it very pleasurable to drive in, right?
Right.
So that's kind of missing. But in terms of the layout of the city, I was successfully able to kind of navigate away from the first race before taking it on. Kind of had my bearings in terms of where to go. It wasn't perfect. It's not one for one by any means, but I think they've done an amazing job capturing the feeling of the place, like where my old office was next to the baseball stadium, and the geometry there was like uncanny in terms of how accurate some of the things were. And then also, like, it's almost like they took every, 4 or 6 blocks and kind of smashed them into a single block.
That's kind of what I've heard about, like, Grand Theft Auto 5 and its recreation of Los Angeles or LA Noire as well. I gotta say, Seattle is... it's kind of okay depending on what district you're in. Surprisingly, the area surrounding the, baseball stadium... the field, I guess it is. And the docks, that looks pretty spot on. Once you start getting into downtown, there are aspects where it's okay, I know this corner. I know, this is where the monorail kind of intersects with this, multi 5-way intersection. This is supposed to represent this and that, but it's really hard to navigate just based on kind of your knowledge of the city. I wonder if Detroit is more modeled out because that's the opening city. That's where they know everyone is going to spend, at least some time. So they spend a lot of time getting that one right. One of my favorite details about Seattle is that Space Needle looks great. The little kind of parking circle in front of it for drop-offs and ride shares and stuff like that look really good. But next to, just outside the Space Needle is a part of what is in real life called the Seattle Center, which is just kind of a big area with a giant food court. It's a big building with a kind of the main floor is a food court. There's a children's museum underneath. There's I think city offices and stuff up above, and then there's this big outdoor area. There's a ice rink. There's a big fountain that kids can play in. There's the Mopop. It used to be the EMP, the Experience Music Project. Kind of a very artsy museum of pop culture, all these kind of attractions all in that one spot. It's a very good concentrated place for tourists.
Yeah.
And a nice place to hang out for locals as well from time to time. But in The Crew, the way they depict that is they just have what looks like a fairly untextured rectangular box with just Seattle Center written in plain font across the side of it. It's okay. This is really papering over a lot of the details.
I will bet any amount of money it's because that font is Futura or something, and to accurately reproduce it, then they would have to pay a licensing fee. Yeah, the whole...
It's not the font that's a problem.
Fair. Yeah, the whole thing has that sort of effect of... I do think the landmark-ish it's they looked at a map and they took the most notable areas and they recreated them with, let's call it 80 to 85% accuracy, which is very high as far as I'm concerned. And then the rest of it is kind of they're just trying to nail the skyline of what the thing looks like and not quite the on the ground details. But either way, I'm excited. I'm excited to go check out New York and Boston, and I wonder if I can go down to Coney Island and see that whole thing.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool game. I really like, and one of the ideas that we pitched, I feel like it was fairly early on in the series, but it might have been in Playwright, of course, was kind of like a 1-to-1 scale United States procedurally generated racing game, which pulls in information from like Google Maps or whatever publicly available information and kind of populates the map from there, which I still think is a distinct possibility, but it makes me really excited for Microsoft Flight Simulator because they incorporate Bing Maps information to actually get like to kind of fulfill that dream, of getting like what every little square mile of the world actually looks like. And of course they spend like some more time really touching it up in the places that they know a lot of people are going to be flying to and flying over. But you should be able to at least see like an approximation of what seems like pretty much anywhere in the world. So I'm really curious to give it a shot and see how accurate it is. And maybe this will be the time when I can find my old house.
It's funny that you say that, and I know we want to get to the pitches, but one of the first things I downloaded when I got the Oculus Rift was Google Earth. And there was something about being able to zoom in and be in places that I hadn't been for years, visit old neighborhoods or see my old school and, even just go to old apartment buildings and stuff that I've lived in. You get, for me, because I've kind of lived in a bunch of places at this point, and I have nostalgia now for different parts of the map, I guess, from different parts of the globe. And I went back and I saw those things, and there was just some culmination of being able to zoom all the way in and have that insane perspective. And also they have this wonderful music and just a killer presentation on Google Earth that I was really, I got emotional. I was very moved by just what technology is able to do. So I love that kind of thing. And I'm sorry that I haven't tried the cruise sooner.
One of the things about, Google Earth is cool using the desktop version where you can kind of like zoom in from above and see where everything kind of sits contextually to one another. You get that bird's eye view. Using the VR version is cool because everything kind of feels like little doll houses that, you can't get like close enough to where you feel like you're walking the streets necessarily, but you can get close enough to where you can kind of like bend over and peek in the windows.
Sure, yeah.
And then there's that Google Street View, which allows you to kind of like zoom from photograph to photograph, from 360 photograph, and so you can kind of get a sense of like of what each intersection looks like. But it must be right around the corner where we can turn that experience into something that more closely emulates free movement.
Yeah,
like to be able to kind of map the Google Street View photographs onto like some sort of like a format that feels like you're walking around in a video game. I oftentimes like load up Google Street View just because I'm like, I want to feel like a virtual tourist for a little bit, but then get really turned off by the experience because I'm just like, it's like looking at pictures and
right.
You really feel like you're dedicating yourself when you click over to the next spot. There's that whole kind of like loading zoom transition.
Yeah.
You have to kind of reorient yourself, and it just doesn't feel as clean and as accessible as it could.
If you ever get a chance, go to and check out some video demos of Apple Maps, and one of the they introduced it just a year or so ago, and of course it's one of these things that's, like in very, very selective places, but when they have their 3D kind of zoom in street view thing, they actually do full geometry, like built out transitions. So you feel like you're kind of hovering at about car height.
Okay.
And it's really wild.
Cool. Well, eventually I would love a video game where you can just kind of like, pilot a little character around anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Even if you can't interact, and even if there's some, obvious and noticeable jank, I feel like it's something that, we'll be able to accomplish. It feels like it's just technologically right around the corner. But anyways, until then, I mean, that almost is a video game pitch, but let's go with what we have prepared today. What are you bringing in?
Okay, so today I've got a pitch for you that is essentially, I was thinking about the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and then I was also thinking about something collecting dust in my closet, which is the Guitar Hero, well in my case Rock Band, guitars. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be cool to do a sort of musical adventure game where you can actually use the guitar as a controller and move around the world? It was like maybe even strumming up and down as your footsteps, the same way that you kind of got going with a little ring fit jog in place to actually jog in the game. You use the buttons to navigate around, and then you kind of go through a Zelda-like adventure, defeat different dungeons, or potentially just collect a certain amount of enemy defeats or something, and that unlocks notes in a song or a score. And then these songs become things that you can play back using the guitar for people to either help them solve their problems or complete quests, or maybe even in combat.
All right, starting the clock there. This is interesting. I feel like, gosh, I don't remember if this is real or something that I'm completely making up, but when Brutal Legend was being developed, were there features where you could, well, I don't think it made it into the final game, but I seem to remember there being like some interview talking about like very minor features that you could unlock by plugging in the guitar and actually kind of like playing along. There are certain like small, like little tiny rhythm game segments in there that I don't know if they would map one-to-one with what, you know, Guitar Hero fans were used to. It's more kind of like 4 notes, almost like a Ocarina of Time, kind of like a ocarina song to summon your vehicle or to warp to different parts of the world or whatever. But yeah, I would love to incorporate any like this type of controller into a game where it feels like, you know, playing different chords, a different combination of notes would have some sort of like a attack or an elemental effect on the world.
That was exactly where my mind started to go, right? Which is, as I thought about sort of Zelda and the experience of kind of, the core of that game is learning the songs and then, you know, kind of employing them as you try and solve these issues. And I couldn't help but have that saying, well, I think it would be cool, and I think we all thought it would be cool, how the direct control felt of the ocarina. Could you reproduce something like that? Only being able to leverage the guitar, which is obviously a more sort of naturalistic interface.
I think the big problem becomes actually like doing everything else in the game. I think it's easy to build like fun and interesting mini games that utilize the guitar, but when it comes to like actually navigating around, especially a 3D world, like doing 2D is possible, but would be difficult. Moving it into 3D and having to factor in camera control. The Rock Band guitars, I don't know about Guitar Hero, but Rock Band guitars all have a little D-pad on them, which you can use for navigating menus and stuff like that. And so theoretically you could use that to navigate like a top-down world or something like that, but it's not going to be pretty.
That's exactly what I was thinking too. I was like, oh, well, we do have access to a D-pad, but yeah, the best I could figure is like hold down, like you're always kind of moving forward as you strum, and so you kind of get like a Resident Evil 2-ish tank control-y kind of thing where you're able to kind of turn left and right with 2 of the buttons when you're not in combat, and then kind of strum to ensure that you're actually moving in that direction. But holding one down while you're still would be kind of how you turn around. So unless, I guess you could create settings and stuff to make that feel fast and responsive, but otherwise, yeah, like you said, it would probably be, you know, a hurdle to be sure.
There's also the overdrive or the star power, depending on which game you're playing, which you activate by tilting your guitar upwards. So it can track the angle of the guitar nose to some degree, but I don't know if that's like, if it's like a binary switch that's flipped at some point, or if I doubt that it's tracking, you know, the entire angular journey of the neck as it's tilted up.
Oh yeah, I've heard the star power thing, or it, you know, makes you wonder what you could do control-wise with the whammy bar. as well.
Oh yeah.
There's some turning to be had with the whammy bar, I think.
So you could do something that's really on rails, something like a Time Crisis or something like that, or House of the Dead. Maybe you can incorporate a little bit more kind of freedom of movement and control, but something that more or less stays within or something like a Rez or a Star Citizen, where it's just kind of like aiming around the screen and then performing different like chords to fire weapons in different quadrants or whatever.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think then you could almost treat, imagine, this is kind of a whole different direction. Imagine a House of the Dead like one of those on rails arcade shooters where you actually could go like backwards through the land. So maybe the guitar in this scenario, like you hold down a button when you're not like, potentially you have to like throw it up to go into attack mode or something. But otherwise you're kind of in navigation mode and you can kind of rewind through previous vignettes so that you're talking to the appropriate person or have access to the right NPC or dungeon or enemy. But songs that you learn and the tunes that you learn they stay with you, right? So you go forward in the game and then you learn a new lick, let's call it, and then you're like, oh, it's almost a Metroidvania where you can kind of rewind, and then there's parts where the path kind of splits left and right, and you can go back and go down the other path, and then use your sort of lick that is a new power to execute and defeat a new, area of the game.
Yeah, I do like that.
It's a little heady, I think, at this point still, but hopefully it's a good word picture.
Thinking about like the concept of the game, what can we do to kind of contextualize all of this? You can have the character play as like a bard on like a fantasy quest, maybe even acting as kind of like a support class to a group of more traditional wizards and warriors, which would help kind of explain like why you don't have completely free movement. You're just kind of following your group around. And then obviously, they're not going to let the bard be the one who's determining the direction of the entire group.
That would be cool. And then that case, you could say what battle more looks like is you're watching a battle play out and you need to properly buff your group or debuff the enemies with different sorts of songs and licks that you're learning. And then it almost becomes the Guitar Hero or the Rock Band in that case, where you're watching something very concretely go down and you're saying, okay, this is how I need to respond to this situation. They need this song at this moment.
So there could be songs of healing, songs of area of attack, songs that correspond with different elements, things you can do to affect the environment to aid in traversal and treasure finding. It would be interesting if you could slow down time, kind of like Majora's Mask. Wonder if there are ways you can kind of communicate with your compatriots or not really subvert what they want to do, but if they're kind of, if their default mindset is like, we're going to press ahead no matter what, and you think there's a little bit more to explore here, if you could trigger something in the environment or whatever to cause them to spend more time in an area where you're pretty sure treasure is buried or whatever.
Yeah, that's neat. And you could also, you can use that sort of rhythm game mechanic to be able to understand and detect kind of failure states, right? So you have measures of, oh, you didn't hit the note, you didn't complete the tune, and therefore, you didn't give your team X ability or X buff or whatever have you.
Yeah, you can have that kind of those notes on screen that you can play along with. Maybe at some point kind of late in the game, you get your music book stolen from you and you have to kind of like go from memory for a little bit until you get it back. I would like if it almost is like an alchemical type of thing where you can experiment with different tunes, and if you get them a little bit off, like maybe they'll have kind of a adjacent effect without going exactly with what you're looking for.
Yeah, I like that because like Ocarina of Time, unless it was like specific to a moment in the game where they really didn't want you to fail or they were teaching you the song, they didn't show you the notes of the song, right? They gave you a little reference book that you could look at, but in the moment, unless you wanted to keep pausing and referring back, you kind of had to know your way around those tunes. And so I think something that would encourage, give you a little, musical book that's simplified with the colors and the buttons and that sort of thing. I think it would be really cool to, demand that somebody actually, learn it.
Let's close that one down and let's give it a name. When you introduce this as kind of an Ocarina of Time spin-off, or not a spin-off, but kind of a takeoff from that idea.
Are you about to say what I think you're going to say?
I think so. It was a thought that I had a long time ago of like, I want to create a rock opera of this game and call it the Rockarina of Time, which I think would be a fun name for a rock opera.
Yes, it's very fun, and that's exactly where my brain went. So there's a 100%. Our Venn diagram is a complete circle.
Good. Should we co-op this for this game? It would be kind of weird to release a game with a name so similar to another game, but it's just an idea at this point. Nintendo's not going to stop us.
The Rockarina of Time. At least we've put it out there in the universe, and we also invite anybody listening to make something great with everything we pitch on this show. So maybe it'll be us, maybe it'll be them, but that we may have just willed the Rockarina of Time into existence.
I remember when I thought of that, I was so kind of proud of the idea that I made this post on Facebook where I didn't want to spell it out, but I wrote a message that used like the Legend of Zelda Rockarina of Time as like the first letter of every word. So that way it's almost kind of like mailing yourself something as like the poor man's copyright, where I could, nobody's going to pick it up at the time, but I can go back later and say like, hey, yeah, that's right. I had this idea way back then.
Well, now it's on audio now, baby.
That's right. So now, yeah, less sneaky, but it's out there. I don't know. I doubt I'm going to be writing any rock operas anytime soon.
I support you. You can claim it as your own.
Let's go over to my pitch, and it is surprisingly similar to what you pitched today.
Good.
I'm interested in a game that is controlled via accordion, perhaps using real accordions in the style of what is it? Rocksmith, the Ubisoft game that taught you how to play guitar by plugging a real guitar into the computer or the PS4. This could be, I was trying to think of like some sort of mechanics and movement and some sort of like a fun way to control a character using the good old squeeze box. So let's go ahead and put that one out there and start the clock.
Now, I don't remember if I've revealed this on this show, but you do or do not know I was once a member of the Lowell Accordion Orchestra.
Really?
Yes. I did not actually play accordion in it. I played keyboard or piano, but I was surrounded by accordion players, and our music school's speciality was accordion. Yeah, I guess my first question is in the opening salvo, because do we know our way around an accordion? And if so, were you thinking kind of the old traditional Italian, or I think it might be French button accordion, or the Italian piano on the right, buttons on the left accordion?
That's what I was thinking. And I mean, that's kind of what I picture when like the whole kind of like,
yeah,
the full size Weird Al Yankovic accordion,
Yeah. All right, good. So one of the things I always found interesting about the accordion was the playing the accordion is really about air management, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's a sort of breathing instrument. It breathes in and out. A lot of what accordion players are learning is how to make admittedly, sometimes that breath has to take place in the middle of a series of notes, depending on how loudly you're playing. So I'm wondering how we could teach the breathing, or make the accordion breathing a mechanic that someone's managing.
Yeah, I was thinking, there's kind of the main mode in Rocksmith is to basically play, along with real licensed songs, and there's this whole note track that it kind of walks you through it just like a regular Guitar Hero or whatever. But part of what the software does is that includes like several mini games as well. I remember there being one in which you are kind of like shooting ducks from the top of the screen, and based on which note you hit on the neck of the guitar, it fires like a laser from that area in the screen. So little like arcade games that you can play to get you more comfortable with like moving your fingers around the guitar neck and all these different things. So I was thinking of like a fun way to not necessarily make you play music, but to just get you comfortable with like holding and controlling the instrument. I was thinking of like, there was a game, oh gosh, Oh, it's just a recent game. I'm going to see if it's still on the Steam new releases. It might not be. It might just be like a little bit too old for that. Shoot, it's not. Well, I'm not going to remember the name of it, but it's kind of like a stretchy type of character with like two big long legs that it can kind of use to maneuver around. And I'm seeing like something like that, but in like a side-on setting where you can kind of extend the accordion to extend, your leg one way or the other. And then you can adjust its height with the keys. You're playing a higher note makes the leg kind of go up higher. So you can kind of like climb around a mountain or climb over obstacles or whatever by basically playing different notes on the accordion to maneuver this little creature around.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I know that accordions have, or some of them have these little switches that are right above the keyboard that actually change the reeds or the sort of timbre of the notes being played. So I wonder if you make something so that there's like sort of 3 movement modes, or in the same way that you can kind of switch fighting stances in Yakuza, if you kind of use these reeds and the notes that would be played out of them as a way to jump between those things.
Yeah. So, so I understand like the keyboard side of the accordion. The other side, I'm not as familiar with what effect that has on the sound. Do you know?
Yeah. So you can almost think of the other side of the accordion like programmable macro buttons. What they are increasing octaves of the circle of fifths for every available sharp and flat on the keys. At least I think I'm remembering that correctly. So accordion players, please correct me. But yeah, when you play them, they're playing like a series of notes. So a C major chord, for example, will be one of those, X amount of buttons on the right-hand side, left-hand side. I guess it depends on what handed you are. Maybe an accordion can be strapped either way. But yeah, ideally the left-hand side plays, or the left hand plays those buttons, and that's what kind of, if you were going to do the melody on the right, very plucky notes, that sort of thing, then on the left is where you'd have more of your dancing bass lines of boom, bump, boom, bump, boom, bump, boom, bump, 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 sort of stuff happening. So maybe there's some mechanic where you're having to keep pace or something with the buttons on the left-hand side. But now we're into like as many or actually more buttons that are on a computer keyboard, so we're in for a real treat.
Yeah, but the way that Rocksmith controls is that it kind of like listens for the note that you're playing. So if your guitar is out of tune or whatever, then it's not really like, it's unable to track like where on the guitar neck you're actually pressing, because it just doesn't have that technology. It's just a USB cable essentially that plugs into your guitar. So it kind of has to infer like what buttons are being pressed. So that might be a limiting factor, but I have a feeling with something like an accordion. Do you have to tune an accordion? Do accordions go out of tune?
Accordions do go out of tune because they're using reeds that are held on by a wax, that they're like, a real accordions are all assembled by hand, but there is, and you can look it up, the Roland V accordion, which is the Roland, the keyboard company, has made essentially an electronic accordion that everything is just coming out of a speaker, and it's really just simulating the passing of air with just noise. So you might be able to, right? Because how many people are going to go spend $500 to get a real accordion, $500 to, upwards of, $5,000, depending on what accordion you want. So it could be possible to construct, if you don't build in the speaker and all this sort of modes and technology, an accordion that is much closer to the Guitar Hero or Rocksmith guitar in terms of how expensive it would be, right? Maybe you can do a $100 accordion add-on that is mostly a MIDI controller for the game, and then actually just send MIDI inputs. It won't go out of tune, it won't break, that sort of stuff.
I think the real interesting promise in these types of music games is being able to take your knowledge that you gain in the game and apply it to actually being able to play the instrument. But I know that the number of people that just have accordions sitting around the house is considerably less than the people who have guitars.
Well, this is what we'll do. We'll make a companion app. If we make it a MIDI controller, we'll do a companion app. And the companion app will be in charge of all the sound samples and all that stuff. And you can still use it as a MIDI controller, because that's kind of what the V accordion really is. It's an elaborate MIDI controller with a speaker built in. I like the idea of being able to use the accordion for different stuff. I would almost want the setting or something to be in all these like great French bistros and Italian restaurants and and I guess Weird Al Yankovic concerts, all of the spots that accordions appear in our life. A nice German Oktoberfest would be a great place for the accordion too.
Yeah, accordions are the things that both the German and the French can agree on. Finally, there's something.
Oh, we could have united the world with the accordion, couldn't we?
Accordion could have prevented World War II.
So it's Rocksmith for accordions. What I wonder, like, so there's also, right, I think you can train someone, especially if this is a MIDI controller, can produce a lot of different sounds. This Rocksmith could potentially also be, now you have access to a keyboard, right? So it could be a little keyboard simulator. I've always wanted like Rocksmith for piano. I don't know if that exists. Maybe Rocksmith does it, having that. And then also, I did play in an ensemble once the bass accordion, which is like accordion for babies, because it is only the right hand, or it's really accordion for piano players. It's just looking at the piano sideways, and the left hand is simply just a big controller for the air. So to release and very quickly suck in air, because the big bass accordion needs to whomp, whomp, and it takes these very breathy notes to play. So you could train somebody on, if you build in one of these air release valves, a bass accordion as well, which would be fun. And then they can play little concerts. Let's do a Twitch Sings version of this where they can play little concerts with an accordion ensemble and really feel like they're part of it.
All right, that's all the time we have there. Let's wrap it up and give it a name.
Man, this is the opposite of rock, isn't it? Is this Polka Smith?
It's better than accordion to Jim, or see, be polka.
What a topical reference.
I'm just about 13 years past my prime. Yeah, I mean, Polka Smith, Polka Face, Polka
Face is pretty good, which is a Weird Al track, yeah.
That is true, yeah. Polka Stars VR.
Yeah, sure. Let's make you strap an accordion and a headset to yourself. I like Polka Stars VR. That's funny.
Okay. I think it's a good takeoff on an existing game. So
we can also build a $5,000 bundle that includes a real accordion and a VR headset.
Cool. Polka Stars VR. Let's move over to our community. We have a new name. This comes from Lunar Loony, who says, "I don't have a good title for this, but here's my plan. Pinball dating sim. There's a selection of characters of various genders, and each of them has a favorite pinball table. To win their affections, you have to play a game against them. A lot of the time, beating their high scores will impress them, but depending on their personality, you might have to let them keep their top spot. Completing goals within the table will also impress them, and each character has a particular goal that they'll be really turned on by. Finding out what that is part of the game. Hope this one generates some discussion because it sounds a bit more basic at the minute. Thanks." Awesome, starting the clock.
Well, I'm hard pressed to keep this just a straight dating sim, because there is something about getting a ball in the hole that is very erotic on a pinball table. And I think depending on, I like the idea of taking those sort of, that classic pinball score screen that does a lot of flashing and refreshing and stuff, and use that to display like the, essentially two color partner who you're trying to woo or romance, or in the case of The Sims, woo-hoo, potentially.
I've mentioned it on the show before, but I felt bad. It was a long time ago now, but that we keep referencing like dating sims on this game, and really, like, I don't have that much of a base of operations for what makes for a good dating sim, or
Same.
I feel like I had a very kind of narrow view of what dating sims were. And so I did a lot of like research into like, what are people doing in that genre? And one of the game names that kept coming up, I don't know if I can give it a straight recommendation, because as I understand, there is quite a bit of naughty stuff in there. So, if that's what you're into, great. If not, like, this isn't me telling you to go out and do your own homework as well. But a game called Honey Pop, I think it was. It's been in Humble Bundles and stuff before, so people might have a copy, but essentially like a standard dating sim, but on dates, I believe you're playing like a Bejeweled style match 3 game as a way of kind of simulating the demands of keeping another person entertained, So you're kind of doing these kind of brain involved tasks while you're on the dates, and there's like meters that are not timing you necessarily, but kind of cooling down, and you have to do multiple combos in a row to keep people interested and to keep the energy of the date alive, and match certain colors which have different effects. And so I think that type of thing, that type of really nice kind of metaphor through mechanics can really shine in a pinball table, in which it might feel a little bit uncontrollable, but there are, like, if you're not a pro, but at least a pinball wizard in training, a pinball Harry Potter, then there's quite a bit that you can do with those tables, and hitting the ball into different areas, and triggering different, almost kind of like narrative segments to unfold. So that I think that maps onto dating and relationships and stuff really well.
Yeah, I definitely, where my mind starts to go when I think about like what's cool about this is actually Yoku's Island Express.
Yeah.
The way that there was a Metroidvania in there, but then there was also this very kind of cool, legit pinball game. Since I'm a bad pinball player, at least I think I am, I'm not sure. I don't know what good pinball play looks like. Often find myself when I approach a pinball table, because I don't really understand the game. I guess every table is sort of different mechanics, like what doing well feels like, other than like, oh, I got the ball to go up this narrow path a couple times. That must be good. It's making noises and I see score going up. So maybe potentially you build in a little bit more of a traditional, maybe an adventure game around it, right? And you do kind of a night in the woods style thing where you're going on dates with people, and as you start to get into the conversation phase or whatever, you guys start talking about things, and that is like playing a pinball table that's kind of morphing before you or something like that.
Yeah, I feel like one of the things that pinball tables do well is they kind of guide players and tutorialize as they go. Usually you kind of you stumble upon the beginnings of like strings of missions, you could say, by just kind of like hitting the ball in the right place. But once it ends up going up the right ramp, or you hit, one of, a number of targets, the others will light up, or something on the table will open up or move, and something will change to become apparent that like in what you just did, you've opened up an avenue for further exploration. So I feel like, that's oftentimes the way that dating feels as well, where you sit down with somebody that you don't really know. You're basically kind of like firing in the dark until you find like a conversational thread that they're really interested in. And so you might throw a couple of topics out there. And then when you get on to like, oh, okay, obviously, talking about work didn't really do anything. Talking about, the government didn't really do anything. But, now that we're on the subject of like Eastern religions or whatever, then all of a sudden, she's really lighting up. And, it's like you kind of find those areas where there's interest where you might not have expected it.
Yeah, I'm going to have to look it up on the Nintendo eShop and actually play a bit of a pinball game myself, because I know they have those virtual pinball games that I guess are probably a ton of licensing work, but one of the things I've always wanted out of a digital, and let's assume this is a video game and not a physical pinball game. One of the things I've always wanted out of digital pinball games, and I don't feel like I recall seeing, and correct me if I'm not here, but the way that in some fighting games, especially NetherRealm fighting games, you have this sort of stage transitions of someone being able to be knocked into an entirely different stage, or I think the Injustice games do this, an entirely different experience. Like, I think digital pinball games should play with the medium a little bit more. And like you're saying, as you get onto a topic, maybe that's you just happen to, you're in the first phase of the conversation, you get the ball down this sort of narrow alleyway that you've been targeting, and now you transition all the way into a whole new stage, and you're like, okay. And it's a metaphor for like, we're in politics territory now. Like, there's landmines all over the place. You don't want to say the wrong thing, but you want to potentially suss out whether or not this person shares your ideals, or maybe has very different feelings about politics than you. And doing so, depending on the subject matter, really evolves. And so you get that kind of the relationship, the conversation, the date, as we all know, like a first date with somebody can be excruciating, as you're like potentially figuring out, you're kind of both doing an impression of who you want the other person to think that you are. And so some metaphor for that with this pinball would be really interesting to me.
Yeah. Not to contradict, but I feel like one of the kind of core tenets of pinball video games, I guess I can't really paint with this broad of a brush because, there are pinball games that do kind of revel in these more unrealistic aspects, like
it's the physics, is that what you're saying?
Well, I was going to say that like there's a certain pride in keeping it contained to what you could realistically do in a real pinball table,
right?
So obviously the like Zen pinball and the ones that are either recreating real tables or creating games that could be turned into real pinball tables, or even stuff like Pokemon Pinball and Metroid Prime Pinball, while they have a little bit of like kind of extra elements, like they more or less kind of adhere to the basic shape and structure of a pinball table that you can kind of imagine being transformed into a game that adheres by those rules. It's almost easier to paint outside the lines, that it feels like there's a certain like discipline that comes with painting inside the lines, so to speak, doing what would be like mechanically viable. There's another game that came out recently called maybe it was Pinball Wizard, Whizball or something like that. It's a game on the Apple Arcade where you play as like a wizard who's entering like a tower, and every floor of the tower was like basically a miniature pinball table in a way. There was little like objectives, and the wizard was kind of a bulbous fellow himself, and he would kind of run about these levels, and you would hit him back with the paddle. And if he ran into enemies, then he would either like attack them or be hurt by them based on whether or not they were in their like, hurting condition. And he would be able to break like barriers and stuff. And you don't want him to, drop below the bumpers and hurt himself by falling down the stairs. And it was just like a fun way of like incorporating pinball rules into otherwise like a kind of an action RPG.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, trying to work within, it almost makes you wonder if like you could do a dating sim that you're, for whatever reason, you're a person who is hopelessly taking all their dates to this pinball arcade. And you're actually going around and playing different pinball games together, and you're trying to potentially find a game that the person you're on a date with will like. And be able to have conversations and bond over that sort of thing. I know that that's probably why my brain like went to Yoku's. And one of the reasons why I enjoy Yoku's Island Express is because you're actually controlling, the little ant Yoku, that he himself has movement and momentum. So you can almost a little bit control the ball in a way that you couldn't in midair on a pinball table. But yeah, we could keep it hardcore and actually make it like all these pinball games where they're simulating the tables. They don't really go through the trouble of wrapping a story around them. And I think telling the story of a dating sim or relationships would be really fun.
Anyways, I feel like we just barely scratched the surface, but we have run out of time on that one. So let's give it a name and let's throw it back to the community. If people have interesting angles to add, then you can comment on any of our episodes and continue to build.
What if we called it Clubhouse Games 51 Worldwide Classics?
That's good SEO. Anyways,
that'll get us a lot of hits. It's hard not to put pinball in this, but
I mean, we probably should somewhere.
Well, if you are somebody, man or woman, going on a lot of dates with men or women, then potentially you're just a pinballer.
Pinballer is that's pretty funny. I like that. We can work with that. That's good. Pinballer. That comes in from Lunar Loony. Thank you for writing into our pitch page, which anyone can use to submit their own video game ideas at playwrightcast.com/pitch, or you can email us playwrightcast@gmail.com, or you can tweet us at playwrightcast.
Special thank you to PROTODOME for the use of our theme song Hello World off the album Blue Noise. Go check out the other great shows on that Kane and Rince video game discussion website. I'm going to plug the website specifically, not the network this time. So go to kaneandrince.com, listen to Sound of Play, listen to Kane and Rince, listen to the Sausage Factory.
Very cool. Anyways, to take us out of the show today, I'm not remembering, are you...
I think I might owe you a redacted game.
Okay, I think that sounds right.
Okay, redacted memo game. Here we go. You get 3 guesses.
Okay.
Redacted is a puzzle platformer. Oh gosh, I feel like that really gives a lot away. Drawn in a painterly style where the player manipulates the redacted in strange and unusual ways. From a house in the city, journey to a series of worlds and solve puzzles to rescue a redacted. In each world, you have a different redacted to affect the way redacted behaves, and it is redacted's strangeness that creates the puzzles.
All right, I feel like this one has to be Braid, right?
Oh my god, it was too easy. It was too easy. There was a lot of details in there. I should have picked something a little harder, huh?
That's all right. It's a good one. Good game. People should get out there and play Braid if they haven't already. I was just thinking recently, it's like not as easy to get your hands on Fez as it should be. I think it's like one that's not backwards compatible on Xbox One, or there's some like a couple of areas where I was like very notably missing.
You were like, certainly it'll be here, and then it's not.
Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah, and it's funny because looking back at that big class, right, of indie games, the indie game, the movie class of indie games.
Yeah.
I think we, a lot of us, I think I'm on this list, would gladly play a nice, 4K 60 FPS remaster some of this stuff. I wonder if even, them being independent, if they even made the assets like that. But please, give me a crisp, polished looking Braid. I'm for it, even if we have to use some AI scaling or something.
Yeah, I mean, I know that the sprite sheets were published on that one, so I assume there is like kind of a maximum resolution that could blow up to without losing quality. But yeah, I mean, technology's out there. Let's get that polished up.
Fair enough.
I'm sure it still looks great on PC.
It's got
Anyways, that's our show for today. Thank you for listening again, and we'll catch you again next week.
Bye.